apologize for that. My computer decided to get a spinning wheel just as you were joining.
Oh, nice. Yeah, no, I thought it was my end. All good.
Yeah, how are you today? Are you doing fine?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm in Melbourne, down in Australia, and we
Yeah.
finally are down to 0 new cases. So that's
Oh,
very exciting.
wow. That's
Yeah,
amazing. Oh,
yeah,
that
mine.
has it been quite tough there?
Yeah, it's been a very long winter, I have to say. It was like 2.5 months in pretty heavy duty lockdown,
Oh, wow.
1 hour outside a day, and within like your 5 kilometer radius. So yeah, I mean, it has been worth it, but my gosh, I know a lot of people are so glad to be, coming out of hibernation basically.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. But at least you're going into summer, so you can enjoy a bit more of the sunshine, which will be nice.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe.
absolutely. No, I hope you guys have been going okay. I know the cases have been, you guys are seeing a surge at the moment. So
Yeah, we are, but I think hopefully, with some lockdowns in place, and hopefully if everyone stays smart and looks
yeah,
after themselves, we can maybe curb it a bit and kind of stay
yeah,
under control, but we will
yeah,
see.
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me today. I know we've only got about 20 minutes, so I won't, carry on nattering about COVID and those things. So yeah, if you're ready, I'm just gonna kick off with some questions and we can get into it.
No props.
So what first inspired you to write and direct Relic?
Oh, okay, yeah, Relic specifically. Well, the idea came to me when I was visiting my grandmother who had Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So I think it was really inspired by, watching her condition worsen over the years. But that trip in particular was really, memorable or notable because it was the first time she couldn't remember who I was, and that I remember that having a real big effect on me. At the same time, her house was one that I'd been really scared of as a kid. And so probably those two things kind of came together, and that was the starting point.
Yeah. And I mean, I personally I loved the film. It very much struck a chord with me. My mum passed away when I was quite young from cancer, so I found it quite an emotional story. And I think, it portrays really well quite the, I guess, complicated family relationships. Do
Mhm.
you think the horror genre is kind of like the perfect medium for portraying these more realistic aspects?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I think maybe, yeah, I'm always just fascinated by not so much the horrors that are invading the home, but the kind of terrors that already are inside the home, and
Yeah.
those really deeply psychological, um, uh, yeah, fears, and that that arise between. Uh, I guess there's something really potent about families because it's so much about it relates so much to your childhood, and your fears are that's also when they form.
Yeah.
And so, particularly when you're coming home to somewhere, um, coming back to your childhood home, I think that can be a really interesting time where those childhood fears can come back. So, yeah, potentially horror is a great way to explore those tensions and those resentments that kind of build and simmer over time.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course. And the film is obviously it's very female driven. One of
mhm.
the things that I thought, was exceptionally strong about it. Do you think that there's more opportunity now in today's society to show more female focused horror films?
Yeah, potentially. In terms of opportunity, I suppose that always comes down to who is telling the story.
Yeah,
And
of
in
course.
that way, I would say I would agree that there are more opportunities for women, um, first time women in particular, to be directing.
Yeah.
I think now more than ever, we are seeing an encouraging increase, although we still need to be vigilant, I think, because the numbers are still completely out of whack. So yeah, I would say there is an increase, and also maybe the audience's willingness to kind of engage with those types of stories, and yeah, I feel like I've read so many kind of stats about films with female protagonists, and films that pass the Bechdel test doing well in the box office, which is not really something you take into account when you're writing one yourself. You just kind of write about what you're interested in. But I think certainly for the people who greenlight projects, that would be an attractive incentive. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, we definitely need to be more vigilant. But it's great to see, yourself and other female filmmakers
Hmm.
becoming more prevalent in the genre. I mean, I
Yeah.
know particularly I find it very exciting. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, my partner's watching The Walking Dead in the next room. I hope it's not too loud. I can hear it in the background just going off.
that's
Anyway.
fine. My partner's in the other room taking very loud phone calls. Just before this, he was shouting. Oh God, here we
The joys, yeah.
go. Um, And do you think so? Obviously, Relic, like you mentioned, you drew a lot on personal experiences, and obviously, looking at your grandma, etc. Do you think the dynamics of the film would have been entirely different if it were male generations?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I don't know. I'm just more interested in women and female characters,
Aren't we all?
probably. I just think I'm sure there's a version of Relic with three men that could have been great, but I wouldn't have been interested in telling that story. So yeah,
Yeah, and I think we've got enough men in horror. We don't need that.
I
Um,
agree.
like you said, you've got fantastic females in there in the characters, but also in the cast.
Mhm.
In Emily, Robin, and Bella, they're fantastic in this, and I think they just work so well. So, how did you choose them for the roles?
Hmm. Yeah, it wasn't. I didn't write with any particular actress in mind, so it really
Yeah,
came in the casting process of having kind of creative discussions and brainstorming sessions about the actors I was really excited in, and what combinations could really work. That was a
yeah,
really interesting process to see who could work as a family as well. And for me, it really came down to like obviously being a big fan of all three of their work, but also meeting them and just hearing their thoughts about the script. And they all seem to really have their own relationship with grief that spoke incredibly well to the themes of the film. And I don't think any of them really like spoke about it as if it was a horror film. It was very much about the drama in the script. So
yeah,
I think that really appealed to me. And of course you get a sense of someone's demeanor from meeting them as
yeah.
well.
And you mentioned grief there, which is obviously, I think,
Mm.
it's becoming something that's quite pulled on a lot in horror lately. I think, I mean, personally, for me, grief is one of those, it is one of the biggest horrors. So
Mm.
and when I reviewed Relic, there were a few films that I could see, a lot of connections with. But I'm interested to hear from you. Were there any particular horror or just genre films in general that you took inspiration from for Relic?
Yeah, I guess something like the orphanage, this idea of like the missing loved one and the heartbreak of neglect almost,
Hmm.
or oversight, or whatever it is, abandonment. Um, Also took inspiration from a film like Amour as well.
Yeah,
That really central relationship and aging and loss of memory in general. What else? Yeah, there are quite a few. I'm groping for a grief comparison, but yeah, I mean, I know the film gets compared a lot to Hereditary, but we already like it's a fair comparison, but
yeah,
we'd already seen it by the time I saw it, so I can't really cite it as a as a reference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I guess, you can see why people make that connection, because obviously it's, I guess, a very, a more, a new modern kind of film, again, focusing on grief. But yeah, I think the difference between Relic is that you've got that generations between, daughter,
Mhm.
mother, and grandmother. And something for me that I really felt that was in there was talking a bit about, kind of being, striving to be a better daughter, to be a better mother, which I think, it is quite a, I guess, a heavy topic. Did you
Mhm.
find that the process of going through that with the actresses and yourself, was it quite hardworking and demanding in terms of like the emotional aspects?
Mm. Yeah, I would say for the actors in particular, it was
Mhm.
pretty grueling. There are some weeks in there where they were having to do the more emotionally intense scenes towards the end of the film, and
Yeah,
we did our best to kind of create a safe environment and a respectful environment where they could, have that space.
yeah,
But yeah, everyone was like joking that they'd have to go off and do a comedy after, because there were some dark days. And obviously, it always depends on an actor, but these guys are really like drudging up some of their own shit to, go to those places. So, I mean, for me, it was probably the writing process that was harder emotionally.
yeah,
Just because that's when you're really, have this solitary existence, even though I have a co-writer, and you're really having to dig deep. Whereas in production, there's so many things flying at you that you kind of have to step outside that a bit.
yeah,
But having said that, there was one scene in the film when Edna's bearing the photos where I was just crying behind monitor, and it really hit me. So
yeah.
yeah, I think you have to find a way to manage that, but it certainly creeps in. I mean, you can't just make a film for 6 weeks and like
And
it
have a
can't
good
be agony the whole time. You know what I mean? So
I guess
yeah.
it would probably come through in the film if there was no,
Right. Yeah.
emotion to it. Um,
Yeah, I don't know how well the film would function if I was just an emotional wreck the whole time. Quite tricky.
and there's obviously, like we were talking, there's a lot of emotion in this film, which I think is amazing, but it's also very frightening at times. I watched it with my partner, and he was terrified. He had the pillow. He was like, no, I don't like this. He was like, something creepy is happening. How
Yeah.
did you, because I think it's quite a tough thing to do, how did you entwine those
Mm.
scares whilst also keeping emotion running through it?
Yeah, yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it comes from the starts with the writing. I think you have
Yeah,
to, balance the two, and so that essentially there's two threads to the story. There's, where's Edna? What are we going to do with Edna? But also like, what is wrong with the house? What is in the house? And who is in the house? There's that mystery as well. So you have to balance those and kind of structurally escalate them hand in hand, I suppose, and just make sure that basically that the cat everything that's happening with the house doesn't compromise the character's emotional journey, and like what they would, um, what they would do in a straight drama, essentially.
yeah,
'Cause I think if you prioritize the horror too much, then you start to really feel the writer's hand at work, where there's all these like scares, and you're like, oh, why is that character? So you have to really, um, yeah, you do have to balance both, and I think that just starts with the writing, and then there's things you can do in post, like shift scenes around potentially to make sure the pacing of the scares is kind of spread out, but generally it has to be there in the bones of the script.
yeah, no, of course. And I think it definitely comes through, but there are those very scary parts, especially with like you said, the house. It's
Right.
very claustrophobic once you get into kind of the maze aspects. And I think,
Yeah.
in Relic, there's some incredibly stunning aesthetics throughout, whether it's the grandpa scenes, which are horrific, or the scenes within the house. how did you kind of come up with, what Edna would look like, what the grandpa would look like, and also, that kind of maze element of the house, like
Yeah.
the looks of everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's in terms of how it's a process that starts again with the writing process. I tend to be quite a visual writer, so
Yeah,
you're looking for references even at that stage. And I think, you have a rough sense of it just from visual research or whatever it is, some freaky dream that you've had. You think, oh, that'd be scary. And then when it comes to production, you're having to kind of convey that to, whether it's the concept artist or the prosthetics or the team or the production designer. So
yeah,
yeah, we pulled from a lot of references, but I think the main thing with Edna in particular was that we wanted it to feel very human, even though with the black mold it was kind of taken to a supernatural extreme.
yeah,
It was really supposed to mimic how people do look and feel, like in terms of their vulnerability and fragility at the end of their life.
yeah,
So a lot of what we pulled on wasn't so much like supernatural. It was actually more like, for example, like mummies and
yeah,
how they look, those kinds of things. So yeah, using the human form as like a base, and then that the labyrinth, we really wanted something that there's so many kind of optical illusion images that we pulled, and lots of, I guess it's like architecture that speaks to the uncanny,
yeah,
and
yeah,
kind of finding the unfamiliarity in like the familiar and the banal. I was really interested in that. So yeah, if you look at our lookbooks, there are so many kind of architecture refs that create a mood that don't necessarily make it in as a visual, but it's just a kind of a wealth to draw on when you're designing it.
yeah,
And then in terms of like the the house itself, again, we wanted to create a sense that it wasn't just like a completely, or I guess it wasn't signaling the horror from the get-go. It was like
yeah,
a real sense of a space that was falling into decline, and that, had a real sense of history, and that was supposed to kind of bleed into this labyrinth space because we didn't want it to feel completely separate to the rest of the house.
of
So
course.
that's why you see, the same architectural language as the rest of the house within the labyrinth. It's just warped in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it works very well. And I was like, okay, I'm not exploring in any of my family's houses.
Yeah.
I can stay in one room downstairs.
Yeah.
Um, and you've mentioned a couple of times that the film was obviously quite a cathartic process for you. Do you think that the viewers will also get a sense of this watching it?
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I would hate for people to get to the end of it and just feel depressed. Like I think the sadness is unavoidable, but I do think, for me at least, it's quite a hopeful film and a hopeful
Yeah,
ending. Um, and just highlights kind of the importance of human connection in the face of that kind of darkness. So yeah, I hope so. Fingers crossed. People don't come away being like, "What the fuck did I just watch?"
I don't think so. I think they'll understand the purpose of it. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so I've got one last question for you because I know
Mm.
we just got a couple of minutes. I would love to know what's next for you. What are you currently working on, if you're allowed to say?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I am working on a few things, but probably the one that I hope will go next is a folk horror set in Japan,
Oh, wow.
very much in the vein of like a Wicker Man or a Rosemary's Baby, and tackling the themes surrounding motherhood. So if Relic is about, decay and death, then this is kind of the opposite. It's about creation and birth. So
Oh,
yeah.
that sounds amazing. I'm very excited to see what you come up with next.
Yeah, cheers. Appreciate it.
That's all right. Well, thank you so much. We are bang on time. I'm sure that you've got probably like back-to-back interviews, and it's going to be a fun old evening
No,
for you there.
no. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you so much, Natalie, and I hope you have a good rest of your, I believe it's evening there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You too. All
Speak
right.
soon. Bye.